Story 1. In many of my college courses, I was not allowed to use anything more advanced than a Texas Instruments TI-84. I took the internals from my Texas Instruments TI-89 and installed them in my Texas Instruments TI-84. I never got caught. Story 2. I remember a story from my organic chemistry professor. A student who had not shown up to class all semester kept receiving significantly improved scores after regrades. Students got their tests back, had a day to review them, and were allowed to resubmit for a regrade. People suspected he was cheating because the same unlikely grading mistakes appeared on multiple exams. But the teaching assistants who graded the tests could not confidently say the handwriting was not theirs. Ultimately, an office worker in the department discovered the scheme near the end of the semester. The student staples were angled differently from the exams that had been mass stapled. He had been recreating the tests, printing them, filling them in, and then grading them with the same pen as the teaching assistants, and he had done a convincing job of copying their handwriting. Story 3. I'm not sure if this would work anymore, but if I had to write a paper on a book I had not read, I would find a well-written paper online. Then I would translate the paper from English to German, German to French, French to Spanish, and Spanish back to English. I would place the original and the translated version side by side, clean up the grammar in the translated version, and you have the same concept written just differently enough to avoid plagiarism. It worked like a charm. Story 4. My teacher shared a story about how, after she allowed eating during tests, one student pulled out a giant bag of M&Ms candies and ate the color that matched the answer choices A, B, C, or D. The scheme involved 2 students, and they were only caught when another student reported them. Story 5. Not the student but the teacher. The teacher, whom I will call Mr. A, had a reputation for being a phenomenal instructor who engaged every student, no matter how mundane the subject. Whenever he asked a question, every student's hand shot into the air, and they shouted things like, "Call on me," or "I know the answer." Mr. A developed a reputation in the district as one of its best teachers. A few years later, I was grabbing coffee with him and asked, "What is your trick? How did you get every student to buy in?" He answered, "I told the kids that every time we had a visitor in class, they should raise their hand as if I were giving away free candy. If you do not know the answer, raise your left hand. If you do know it, raise your right hand. That way I know who to call on and we all look good." It worked like a charm. Story 6. I was supervising a final chemistry exam with another coworker. Not 15 minutes into the exam, a hand slammed down on a desk. I turned around expecting the worst, only to see my coworker angrily shouting at a pair of very frightened 10th graders whose desk he had smashed. Amid the shouting, I heard the words Morse code. He proceeded to take them to the office. I called a hallway supervisor to take over and ran after the group. Apparently, the students were silently tapping the answers among themselves in Morse code, not even with their fingernails, just their fingertips. I never heard a thing. My coworker happened to catch a letter in Morse code. I honestly thought he had finally gone crazy because of his appearance. Picture Robin Williams in Jumanji saying, "What year is it?" I am completely sure that if this coworker had not been in the room, they would have gotten away with it. Story 7. In elementary and middle school, we had to write a paragraph each week using all the vocabulary words from that unit. One clever student wrote something like this. One day a student had to write a paragraph for English class. He sat down, picked up a pen, and used all the vocabulary words. The teacher let it pass only once because she had never seen that happen before. Story 8. One of my former teachers told a story about a student who had rigged a tiny scroll of paper inside a wristwatch with notes on it. He advanced the scroll by winding the watch and was caught because he wounded so frequently during the exam, but the teacher admired the creativity. Story 9. In high school, I was in a computer-based learning program, and our science tests were taken digitally. The testing program locked the entire screen when you entered a test. The only way to exit was to click the finish button or turn off the computer. The program also prevented pasting from the system clipboard to stop cheating. After creating a classroom at home, making fake tests, and experimenting with the program, I discovered that you could copy text from inside the test and paste it elsewhere within the test. The developers had not accounted for the sign-in screen, where you select the test and log in. In short, I could copy a page of notes I had taken on the test material, paste it into the login field, then copy it again, enter the test, and paste it into an answer field. I used it to answer every question and then deleted the notes before clicking finish. Story 10. If the original poster is a student crowdsourcing cheating strategies, this is one of the most creative ways of cheating I have seen. Story 11. I am not a teacher. I used to use one of those rectangular erasers because the pencils provided were cheap and their erasers only smudged the marks. The eraser came in a cardboard sleeve. I would rip it open, write test answers on the sleeve, then erase them after the exam so I could reuse it. Story 12. In a college physics class, a student with a very intricate tattoo on her leg wrote formulas between the tattoo lines. Even looking closely, you could not tell unless you knew what you were looking for. You could tell it was test day because she was wearing shorts. Story 13. High school students recreated a Snapple label whose nutrition panel on the back contained all the answers and formulas. They only got caught because I had never seen the flavor before and wanted to see how much sugar was in it. Story 14. I can name the worst. I have shared it before, but it was not my student. It was a friend's. She had downloaded a worksheet for the children to do while she was in a meeting. The children found the worksheet's answer sheet online and copied the answers. The last answer said, "Student responses will vary." One child wrote those words as his answer. Other times, one child misspelled a word or got an answer wrong, and everyone who copied from him repeated the same error. Story 15. A classmate broke the screen and keyboard on his calculator and hid his cell phone in it, so it could not be seen from the teacher's position. The teacher approached him from behind and caught him, though. Story 16. I'm not a teacher, but I was a student. I had a friend who knew Kurdish and Turkish. We all know Turkish, of course. He had to move from his city due to an earthquake and relocate to the opposite side of the country, Istanbul. He was writing his notes in Kurdish on his desk and on the desk in front of him. Since neither the teachers nor we knew Kurdish, it looked like gibberish to us, but we knew he was taking notes in Kurdish. Story 17. Not a teacher, but there is the famous urban legend about how a California Institute of Technology student got a perfect score on a take-home exam. Story 18. I passed a pop quiz in high school by looking across the room and focusing on the top of a smart girl's pencil to decipher whether she had written A, B, C, or D after the teacher asked each question. It was more successful than I expected. I did cheat on a quiz. I support academic integrity in higher education and professional fields, but I do not understand assigning immense amounts of needless information to adolescents and then being surprised that they lack the stamina to handle it and resort to cheating. Story 19. As a teacher, the smartest way I cheat is by giving students a note card and telling them they can put whatever cheat sheet information they want on it. That encourages them to study for their math tests. A pro tip: most students do not know how to study math, which is why they struggle. Think of studying math like practicing an instrument. To learn a piece, practice multiple problems from the same skill set. If you do not practice roughly 8 to 18 problems every day or every other day, you will not overcome the small mistakes and missteps that have been holding you back. Please stop asking whether I am your former teacher. It is 99% likely that I am not. This is a common trick many teachers have used for decades. Story 20. So, not a teacher, but I witnessed probably the biggest cheating-related scandal in our high school's history. For context, we had the sweetest old man as our chemistry teacher. He called everyone bud, buddy, or ma'am. He always helped and volunteered to teach driver's education after school so students could learn to drive. He always had a twinkle in his eye because he genuinely showed love and kindness to everyone. A side effect of this was that he was very trusting. One day, before finals, he ran to the bathroom during class while everyone was wrapping up their lab reports. While he was gone, someone ran to his desk, found the finals just sitting there, took a picture, and then ran back to their seat before he returned. Somehow, no one tattled. Probably because 90% of our grade level in that class was on board with it. The pictures got texted around, but a few people were smart enough to transfer them via Bluetooth so it could not be tracked. After the test, Everyone had high scores and apparently someone confessed. This resulted in a huge investigation by the assistant principals, the school police officer, and faculty. They questioned students and caught so many people, all except the ones who transferred the pictures via Bluetooth. They had to reissue the test. I felt so bad for the teacher. He was really sad that someone had taken advantage of him. Such a good man. Edit. Thank you for the award. Edit. To clarify, the school did not trace the messages. They held one-on-one interviews with the school police officer nearby so students would feel pressured to confess. Apparently a few cracked under the pressure, but if I recall correctly, a fair number got away with it. Edit. Also, the officer was our school police officer with a real badge, gun, and car. He was there to protect us against school shooters or bomb threats, patrol for loiterers, run drug searches, and provide security for after-school events and pep rallies, not a full police force. Story 21. I was grading a written assignment that had a 1,000-word minimum, and one particular paper felt very short to me despite Microsoft Word reporting it was about 1,100 words. On a hunch, I pressed Ctrl-A, and sure enough, after the paper ended there was a lot of nonsense text on a white background. Story 22. I used a text file on one of the original iPods. The teacher was fine with listening to music during tests, which made my life much easier. Story 23. I am not a teacher, but one of my friends in high school wrote all the physics equations we needed to know in a very small font on Jolly Rancher wrappers. Story 24. I had chemistry summaries and many math formulas on my graphing calculator, a Texas Instruments Model 83. I had a backup on a Universal Serial Bus flash drive so I could restore them after a mandatory reset. Story 25. My girlfriend works for a dental exam company that administers very high-stakes exams. Because the exams are worldwide, they have found people in one time zone paying others in another time zone to email questions to them immediately before the exam. Story 26. Stretch a rubber band around a textbook and write whatever you want on it. When you remove the band, the writing will look like scribble until you stretch it to read it. Spanish conjugations drove me to do some incredibly unethical things. Story 27. I had class in the morning with a student who had been a teaching assistant for my physics class the afternoon before, because my old school used a strange period system. He would tell me the answers to advanced placement tests he had graded the day before, and I would write them in black ink on the side of the sole of my black boots. I would then sit with my leg bent, my foot resting on my knee, and read the answers during the test. You could not see them unless the light hit the ink just right. After the test, I would lick my finger and smudge the answers out. Story 28. A classmate printed the answers on his paper in very pale gray, so they could barely be seen. He still got caught because the teacher noticed him reading what appeared to be a blank sheet. Story 29. Students write down math formulas and place them in the calculator's instruction slot. More recently, students have been putting answers on their smartwatches. It is to the point where I require all students to remove their watches and place them on the classroom counter before the test starts. Story 30. A physics professor posted the answers to the homework online after it was due. The thing was, he was merely making existing pages visible, and the uniform resource locators followed a simple, predictable format. If you knew the uniform resource locator, you could view a page before it was made public. Example: fake address physics edu physics homework 001, homework 002, homework 003, and so on. Story 31. During a spelling test, a student asked, "Miss, how do you spell piano?" The spelling word was piano, and the teacher went on autopilot and began spelling it. Story 32. As a student, I remember when my entire grade was accused of cheating because the test results were consistently high. The teachers failed to realize that some answers were hidden in other questions. If you got stuck on one question, you could find the answer later in another question. For example, on a Japanese language test, one question asked what a word meant, and a later question used that word in context so you could infer its meaning. Story 33. Printing a fake water bottle label with test information on it. Story 34. I am a high school teacher, but this story is about my own high school math teacher playing us and cheating. It was an honors algebra and geometry class, and it was well known that Mr. D reused the same questions every year, just changing the numbers. He made a big deal about making sure we all gave our exam papers back to him after we had looked at our scores and gone over everything together to prevent cheating the next year. Of course, some of my classmates got their hands on a complete set of tests from the previous year. Soon everyone had a set. Before each exam, we would sit together and make sure we knew how to solve every problem on that test so we could do it on the real exam with different numbers. Years later, when I became a teacher myself, I saw Mr. D at a funeral. I confessed to him that this is what we used to do. He smirked and said, "Who do you think leaked the test packet to get you to study?" Mr. D had figured out that students will not study if the teacher insists, but if they think they are getting away with something, they will, so he managed to get a test packet out and circulating as contraband. It blew my mind. Story 35. I'm not a teacher, but I used to lightly write the answers on a desk before a test with a pencil. If someone called me out on it before the test, I claimed I was using the write the material down method of studying and did not notice it was marking the desk. After using the necessary material, I rubbed the pencil marks off the desk, thus destroying the evidence. Story 36. My sister-in-law is a teaching assistant at her children's school. Her youngest daughter, my niece, was 7 at the time. She stole the test the night before, pretended it was homework and had her mother help, then sneaked the answers into the test. One of the other students caught her and told the teacher. My sister-in-law, who was overseeing the test, died inside when she realized the homework sheet she had filled out was the test. Story 37. I'm not a teacher, but I heard a story from a friend about a teacher who caught 2 students cheating using Morse code by blinking. Story 38. I used my programmable calculator to write a program for every possible math and physics question that provided each step of the problem-solving sequence. They always said, "Show your work." Story 39. When I was in high school, I bought a pen like that. Each time I clicked it, the message inside would change. I took it apart, taped paper over the tube, and fit small notes I could use on quizzes and tests. Story 40. This is slightly off topic, but I had an advanced placement physics teacher who put a question on our first quiz that we had not learned, just to prove a point. All students in first period got the question wrong, half of second period got it right, and all of third period got it right. His point was proven. Story 41. When I was a student, we wore uniforms and leather shoes. Since mine were a beat-up pair, I wrote on them with a black ink pen. During tests, I angled the shoe just enough for the writing to be visible in sunlight. The edges of our uniform button-down shirts were filled with formulas. Story 42. At my school, we wore long skirts that reached the ankles. Apparently, girls wrote answers on their thighs so they could read them in the toilet during exams. Story 43. In a test at university, the questions were projected on the whiteboard or wall, so the whole class had the same exam with multiple choice answers, A, B, C, D, and E. The entire year agreed to associate each letter with a pen position. A, point your pen forward. B, point it to the right. C, point it backward. D, point it to the left. And E, point it upward. If you did not know the answer, put your pen down. We only had to look around for a moment, see which direction most pens were pointing, and we would know the answer immediately. In my opinion, it was the safest way to cheat because there was no evidence, and no teacher would notice if you took a careful peek for half a second. Story 44. Music students use music sheets as answer sheets for other students. The notes are the same as the answers on Scranton tests. Story 45. A teacher told me a story from United States history. During a test on the United States presidents, a student was listening to music when his audio cable came out of his phone and the phone began blaring a recording of him reciting all the presidents in order. Music was banned afterward, but he was allowed to retake the test without music because of his creativity. Story 46. There is a story I have seen about kids being allowed to bring a 4x6 note card to their exam. The teacher forgot to specify whether the measurement meant centimeters or inches, so someone brought a piece of card 4 feet by 6 feet covered in notes. Story 47. I did not, but my friend pulled this off. We were both college students. Before class discussions, the teaching assistant took attendance online. He always forgot his laptop, so he would ask students if he could use theirs to start the attendance code. My friend obtained a keylogger, let the teaching assistant use his laptop, and captured his account login. The teaching assistant had access to all the quiz answers, which were posted right before the quiz. In the end, my friend did not use the answers because the quizzes were not that hard. Story 48. Wear corduroy pants. Use a razor blade to write notes in the material. If you rub the fabric one way, the writing disappears. Rub it the opposite way and the writing reappears. Story 49. During an advanced placement United States history test in high school, there was a question asking about the author of a book. A student raised his hand and said, "Mrs. I read the book this weekend and I really liked it." The teacher, forgetting she had included that question on the test, replied, "Oh, by that author? I love that book." The whole class burst out laughing, but no one said anything because she had just given us the answer to the test question. Story 50. A student in one of my college classes made her own jewelry and crafted a bracelet with different colored beads to correspond to the answers on the test. For example, red for A, blue for B, and so on. She had obtained the list of answers ahead of time because the professor was well known for reusing tests from prior years, question for question. She used the bracelet exactly as one would use a cheat sheet. Story 51. In my freshman Spanish class, we were asked what currency is used in Venezuela. I had no idea, but I knew it was not pesos. I asked the teacher how many pesos a sandwich would cost there because I wanted an accurate detail for my extended response. She said they actually used the bolivar. Latching. Story 52. My high school trigonometry professor administered all tests using programs he wrote for our in-class Texas Instruments TI-83 graphing calculators. I quickly realized I could close the program, inspect the code using the edit function, extract the answers, and give myself a high B or a low A. I avoided 100% because that would be a sure way to get caught. He soon realized students were doing this and obfuscated his code to make it harder to find the answers by simple inspection. Took more work, but I still found the answers and he began to suspect cheating. Later, he found a way to force the code to self-delete after it ran the first time. He started the test on each calculator before passing them out, so the program would delete itself if you tried to run it again. I brought a set of dead batteries of the same brand he used, accessed the edit function, replaced the batteries with the dead ones, and told him the calculator died halfway through my test. I think I learned more about software testing than trigonometry that year. Story 53. Damn. I was a stupid kid. I would just memorize everything. Story 54. A student wrote the answers to a history test in tiny writing on a piece of paper and rolled it into a clear blue pen that was visible only from about a foot away. I noticed because he was not acting casual while trying to read the pen, and it tipped me off because I had done the same thing in high school. Story 55. One guy photocopied an article from National Geographic, complete with the magazine headings and page numbers, and turned it in as his own work. That was the dumbest. Story 56. Back in high school, I would corrupt an empty Word document so it could not be opened, rename it with a legitimate title, and send it to my teacher at the last possible minute, the night it was due. I would show up to class the next day while the teacher went over the assignment, sometimes using examples from students who had submitted theirs much earlier. I would take notes and then do the actual assignment until my teacher realized a few days later that they had trouble opening my fake file and asked me to resend it. Sure, no problem. Story 57. One time, my class asked the teacher for the answer to the first multiple choice question. She jokingly said she did not know and suggested C. When it was time for the test, we discovered she had actually given us the right answer. Story 58. I remember in middle school we relied on the one student who actually studied. Most of the quizzes our teachers gave were multiple choice, so if the answer was A, the student would cough, if it was B they would sniffle, if it was C they would sigh, and if it was D they would stretch in their seat. Eventually everyone in my science class became that student, and for each quiz a different person would study. Story 59. My friend found the answer key to the multiple choice test online. He recorded himself reading it and threaded a single earbud through his sleeve. On the day of the test, He held the earbud to his ear to listen while taking it, so it looked like he was simply resting his head on his hand. Story 60. This happened in high school English class. We were assigned 4 books over a 2-month period, with a test covering all 4. We had finished reading the first 3 and were about to start the last one when I got sick. I was out for about 2 weeks and came back just in time for the test. The test was multiple choice, choices A to D. Questions drew from each of the books, with each letter corresponding to one of the 4 books. It was fairly easy to figure out the answers about the book I had not read by eliminating choices from the books I had read. I was accused of cheating, but the teacher could not prove it. We only read the books in class, and I was absent while the class read the last book. She never figured out how I answered the questions correctly about the book I had not read. Story 61. I am not a teacher, but here are the methods I used. I wrote formulas on pens that had roll-out calendars. I almost got caught when I lost my grip and the calendar rolled back into the pen loudly, and my classmates looked at me. I wrote formulas on my clothes and body, on the hem of my shirt and the part of my leg covered by a sock. I copied a couple of chapters into the Notes app on my old BlackBerry by hand, copying straight from the book to my phone. I wrote answers into song lyrics on my iPod, but I did not do this often. Either the school had cracked down on devices such as phones, iPods, and laptops, or I had a hard time scrolling with the click wheel. We would swap papers. I only did this during trigonometry because exams were arranged in alphabetical order, and I sat next to a student who was really good at math. Being so close made it less scary, so I did it. I was caught when a new teacher noticed I kept taking out a handkerchief that contained a 1-inch by 1-inch piece of paper with formulas. In hindsight, if I had used a bit of sleight of hand, I would not have been caught. The year before, I had cheated on a test using 2 letter-size sheets of paper. Story 62. My American Sign Language teacher is deaf. We simply cover our mouths and ask someone else for help. That seems wrong now that I think about it. Story 63. In high school, we had a Facebook group chat with almost all students in our year. If 2 classes shared a teacher, we received the same exams and took them on the same day. For example, during an exam, someone from my class would take a picture of the test and post it in the group chat, and someone from the other class who was not taking the exam at the time would send the answers back. Almost everyone in class would be on their phones and see the answers. Later, the class that had been giving us answers would take the same exam already knowing the answers because they received the same test. This usually happened in math, chemistry, and physics. Story 64. Once a friend cut open an eraser and placed notes inside it. He installed a latching mechanism that required pushing the top away from the bottom and then squeezing. The 2 latches would loosen when you separated the top and bottom, and the squeeze would open it. Because he was a good friend, he shared his eraser with me after I had lost mine. Someone had snitched on us and we were called to the principal's office. The principal could not figure out how we had opened it, and we got off scot-free. Story 65. I am not a teacher, but students at my former high school made national headlines for a large-scale cheating scandal. A professional tutor helped students break into teachers' classrooms and install keyloggers on their computers to obtain passwords. Hundreds of students obtained exams early. Teachers became suspicious when previously failing students began scoring 100%. Story 66. Why are you using the word cheating? I prefer to use overcoming obstacles with out-of-the-box thinking. Story 67. I heard that someone learned Braille and attached a Braille note to the underside of the table. Story 68. The smartest methods of cheating will go unnoticed. Story 69. I feel like the original poster is low-key trying to figure out ways to cheat. Story 70. When I was in graduate school, I attended a large, prestigious university where many students attempted to cheat. Their countermeasures were often elaborate. Some taped study guides to the backs of toilet stalls or crumpled them and disposed of them in trash cans so they could retrieve them during exams. Consequently, bathrooms were inspected, trash was emptied at the start of every exam, and students were escorted to the bathroom. Hats were banned because students wrote on the undersides of the brims. Examiners watched for students who had written on their bodies, since those students might shift in unusual ways to view the notes. Special buildings were used only for exams with extra proctors present. Professors had to submit exams to the school a month in advance, and the school securely photocopied and distributed them. My field, English, did not have a major cheating problem, but we still followed the same precautions as higher stakes fields such as chemistry, which is often a significant hurdle for those seeking admission to medical school. Story 71. Hunt, cooing, boast, alleged, flowery, sense, fretful, badge, pathetic, chief. Story 72. Writing with a transparent ultraviolet light pen. These pens have a very dim ultraviolet light that is almost invisible at a short distance and only reveals 1 to 2 centimeters of text. That is enough for many purposes. Only a student's head can accidentally reveal a hint. The light and pen cannot. Story 73. My friend climbed through the ceiling tiles outside the professor's office, crossed the doorway, descended through the ceiling tiles inside, and took a copy of the test. Story 74. I have not tried this method and I do not think anyone else has. Certain high-frequency sounds are audible only to younger people. Some devices can play those tones, so older listeners may not hear them. Students could possibly use such tones to transmit Morse code or similar signals. I know this idea is complicated and not very practical, but I found it mildly interesting and wanted to share. Story 75. It is not elaborate, but my brother once revealed that he occasionally plays 2 cards in the card game Uno and no one notices. Story 76. A teacher told me that there was a smart kid and a stupid kid who both missed the test. The brother, this was an old Irish Christian brothers school, made them take the test and sit on opposite sides of the room, and he constantly walked between them to make sure they weren't cheating. When both got a good score, he was puzzled and eventually asked the smart kid what he had done. It turned out the smart kid had clipped some of the answers onto a small part of the brother's robes, and the other kid took it off as the brother passed. The dumbest one I have ever heard was when one student wrote, "I don't know," as an answer, and another wrote, "Me neither." Story 77. It was a no notes, no textbook final exam in statistics. A student brought a water bottle with formulas printed on the nutrition information label. A girl sitting next to him noticed that he kept glancing at the bottle and told the teacher after the test. I am pretty sure he failed the class. Story 78. Girls placed test answers under their skirts so that, if teachers caught them, they could claim sexual harassment when teachers investigated. Story 79. I have a week of tests next week, with an average of 3 tests per day. Please do not test me, Reddit. Story 80. In my college English class in Japan, a professor gave an open test. Anything that was not connected to the internet. One student brought an American. Story 81. I am not a teacher, but in high school a group of friends and I used to wait for one of the smart students to go up and turn in their quiz. As soon as they did, I would go up and distract the teacher by asking questions. Another student would then go to the tray, pretend to turn in their quiz, take the smart student's quiz that was on top, and bring it back to his seat. The quiz would be passed around to a few people and turned back in when we were done. We did this for every quiz. It was risky, but the teacher was not paying much attention and we never got caught. Story 82. In high school, our physics tests were open note. Classmates who took the test earlier in the day would write answers in their notebooks and give them to students who took the test later. Story 83. We had to supervise students who went to the bathroom during end-of-school exams. If a student used a stall, I was supposed to check it while they washed their hands. Someone had to be the cause of that rule. Story 84. History and English classes had essay exam booklets. I came to the exam with a pre-written essay that I revised and edited to perfection the night before. I did this for 4 classes and earned an A grade in each. Story 85. I am not a teacher, but the cleverest thing I saw was when a student got the instructor to help them cheat. I took an art since 1945 course in college. 4 tests, the instructor showed unmarked slides of artworks. We had to write the artist, the title of the piece, and sometimes the date. After he had gone through all the slides, you could ask him to show any slide again. Instead of asking, "Could you show slide number 10 again?" a student asked, "Could you show the Pollock again?" The instructor obliged without thinking. No one noticed for a few seconds. Then someone snickered and the instructor realized his mistake. He had just identified the slide as a Pollock. Taking it in stride, he said, "If you had been paying attention, I just told you one of the answers. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye."